This election season, the Election Commission of India has been under immense scrutiny and has come under criticism several times, be it for its failure to curb hate speech or because they are not actually releasing the turnout data in absolute numbers. The Election Commission is now being asked to either grow a spine or resign. Recently, a section of activists from civil society, citizen groups, and even former bureaucrats approached election commission in different parts of the country and submitted a memorandum. My guest today is one such person. I'm being joined by transparency activist Anjali Bharadwaj, who met the election commission officials in Mumbai. But before I go across to her, a quick appeal from all of us here at the News Minute. For us, being independent not just means that not taking any sponsorship from corporates or from governments, but it also means taking up people's voices and questioning those in power, like the Election Commission. We've been following this story very closely, and we need your support to continue being independent. So if you like the work we do, then make sure that you check out our reporting fund so you can support our reporters, or you could even become a paid TNM subscriber. How you can do both? The links are in the description below. For the benefit of our viewers, if you can just recap, what are the different inactions and lapses that we've seen or from Election Commission of India this election season?
Look, it's very important that the Election Commission of India, which is mandated by the Constitution to make sure that elections in the country are free and fair, be doing its duties in a completely independent and in a non-selective manner. Now, what we are seeing, unfortunately, and this is not just this time, but this was something we noticed even in the 2019 elections, is that when there are complaints of the violation of the model code of conduct, unfortunately, the kind of action that the Election Commission of India has been taking is very selective. So if there are complaints against leaders of the opposition parties, there is action that's taken with great alacrity. But if there are complaints of violation of the model code of conduct, of hate speeches against the ruling party leadership, the actions of the election commission are wanting. And we saw in the 2019 elections that happened repeatedly. And in fact, at that time, the election commissioner, one of the election commissioners, Mr. Ashok Lavasa, when he tried to put in a dissent note to say that he did not agree with this kind of selective action, we saw was in many senses forced to resign. So we are seeing this time around as well that when there are hate speeches that are being made by leaders of the BJP, including the Prime Minister, the Election Commission is not taking the kind of action that needs to be taken. When recently the Prime Minister made certain speeches which were very communal in nature and complaints were filed, the Election Commission did not act till there was a lot of public pressure. And even then, when the action was taken, it was basically in the form of a notice which was not sent to the Prime Minister, but to the BJP President, Mr. JP Nadda, in which the Prime Minister was not even named. It simply said that some of your star campaigners seem to be making speeches and they need to be reined in. So this really sends out a signal to people during election times that the Election Commission is not functioning in an independent and in a fair manner. And I think that it really destroys the level playing field potentially, which is very dangerous during election times. And it also leads to the plummeting of discourse during elections, the political discourse, because it sends out a signal then that if the ruling party leaders are saying anything which is violative of the model code of conduct, even that will not be taken notice of or action against properly. So this is very, very concerning. The other issue, which I think is very concerning to citizens, is the lack of transparency in the voter turnout this time. For the first time, we are seeing that the Election Commission is putting out voter turnout data in terms of percentages instead of telling people the absolute number of people who turned out to vote. Now, this is something which is coupled with the fact that usually what the election commission does, the practice, the norm is that within 24 hours, the election commission, within the conclusion of polling in a phase, within 24 hours, the election commission puts out the data of voter turnout. This time, after phase one, the election commission took 11 days. After phase two, it took nearly 5 days to put out data on voter turnout. Like I said, even then, it did not put out the absolute numbers, it put out percentages. And there was an unusually high increase in voter turnout. So, when the initial figures were put out by the Election Commission, they were stood at around 60%. But after 11 days, when the figures were revised, they were revised upwards by 6%. And this is not the kind of increase in voter turnout that one usually observes. No explanation was given to citizens. So, this has led people to have serious doubts about what is happening. Why is the voter turnout figure not being disclosed by the Election Commission? And people have now asked the Election Commission to give this absolute number and also to give the authenticated form, which is Form 17C Part 1, which is signed by the presiding officer at the polling station and also by polling agents who are present there, which is the authenticated record of voter turnout. And despite repeatedly people writing, citizens writing to the Election Commission, they have not done the needful. Now, of course, the matter is in the Supreme Court, and the court has asked the Election Commission to explain why it's not doing that. And now the court has given the Election Commission a couple of days to come back and explain why it's not putting out absolute numbers and why part 1 of Form 17C is not being disclosed by the Election Commission.
Before I get to the hate speech part, if you can explain to our viewers why exactly giving out the actual voter number is important and why just giving it in percentages is not enough. That's one part of my question. And the second part of my question is about the revision. Is this the first time that we've seen, like you mentioned rightly, 11 and 5 days for the revision to take place? Because yes, it is when they give it out on the day of the polling, it is an initial estimate, which is usually a rough estimate. But does it usually go up by 6 to 7%? Is that something we've seen in the past?
So the answer to both your questions essentially is that the Election Commission has to, and it has been the norm, it's something they've been doing consistently, that they give out not just percentages of voter turnout, but also the absolute numbers. Now, it's important to understand why we want absolute numbers. See, when you're talking about such large number of people going out to vote, if I'm given percentages, even if it is up to the second decimal point, if there is a change in the absolute numbers, it could give a leeway of thousands of votes, which could affect the the kind of electoral result that we can expect later as well. It can potentially have a bearing on that. So it's very important that the Election Commission be totally transparent and give absolute numbers and not simply percentages when it is declaring how many people came out to vote. And you see, percentages are not something figures that come out of the air. They are actually there are Form 17C Part 1, which is filled in by the presiding officer on every polling station. At every polling station, the presiding officer sends this to the returning officer, who then collates it for the constituency and gives it to the Election Commission. And when the Election Commission aggregates these figures, that's how they arrive at the percentages. So the Election Commission has access to the absolute numbers from where the percentages are being calculated. So it's very important that to ensure public trust and in the interest of transparency, absolute numbers be given out. The second factor is this increase, this unusually high increase. Usually, we do see an increase of about 3 percentage points or thereabouts, but this time we are seeing that there is an increase of 6% in the voter turnout. And the final figures that are being put out by the election commission is taking such an inordinately long time in terms of even just putting out the percentages 11 days after phase 1 got over. Now if you look at the data that is now clear, even if we use the percentages to look at how much increase in voter turnout it is showing, we don't know the exact numbers, but it's nearly 1.07 crore people who the election commission is saying that the number has gone up by more than 1 crore voters. So the voter turnout, when the election commission announced that these many voters have come out at the end of the polling day, if you compare it to the final turnout that the election commission is giving percentages and you convert it, it's more than a crore. Now that's a very, very large number. So naturally there are questions, people wonder, and especially in a climate where the election commission seems to be acting selectively, does not seem to be acting entirely independently, in a situation where appointments to the election commission happened in a manner which left a lot of doubt in the minds of people. All of this, when this is happening, it raises serious doubts in the minds of citizens, which is very counterproductive in a democracy. So when we say that elections and the whole electoral process needs to happen in a completely transparent manner, that really is important for people to be able to repose public trust in the electoral process, and that finally leads to trust in the electoral outcomes, which is so important in a democracy. So I think that these three factors which we have seen: one, the inordinate delay in putting out final figures of voter turnout; two, not putting it out in absolute numbers phase after phase. And this is despite citizens consistently telling the election commission, writing to the election commission, that please put out absolute numbers. It's instead of percentages, instead of absolute numbers, it's percentages that are being put out. And the third thing, that the high increase and usually high rise in the voter turnout, these three things have shaken people's confidence in the voter turnout figures that they are being given by the election commission. So, Pooja, let me clarify to begin with that I am certainly not casting any aspersions. I am simply saying, as someone who has consistently demanded transparency in government functioning, in the functioning of different public authorities across the country, we are not saying that there has to be wrongdoing and therefore people should know. People in a democracy have a right to know. It's a fundamental right, it's a constitutional right. It has been upheld as such by the Supreme Court of India, no less. Even in the electoral bonds matter, the Supreme Court so categorically said that voters, citizens have a right to know in a democracy. So this is what is happening right now, is that there is a certain secrecy with which the election commission is approaching the declaration of the voter turnout. And that, unfortunately, globally, anywhere, if it happens in any institution, it raises many doubts, including doubts of wrongdoing. So while I don't think many people are saying that something has necessarily been done, that we'll have to look at evidence. A lot of things would have to come out. But to be able to even have public trust in the electoral process, transparency is very, very important. And when the election commission, despite citizens writing, we some of us got together and wrote about 10 days ago, more than 10 days ago, to the election commission. There was no response. The letter then was signed by thousands of people across the country. Some of us in a small delegation then went and submitted that letter to the election commission, in which the demand was that to ensure trust in the electoral process, there is need for transparency in the process, and therefore the election commission must not hesitate to put out absolute numbers of voter turnout, and should make public Part 1 of Form 17C. The Election Commission hasn't done it. The Supreme Court asked the Election Commission what the problem was with doing it. The Election Commission said no, that we don't believe that we should do it. And they're refusing to basically comply with this very basic requirement of transparency. So I think that kind of really, in many senses, and I don't blame voters and citizens then, if they feel that there might be something wrong that is happening. Otherwise, we've seen that, why would any institution want to work behind a veil of secrecy? The data is out there. The Supreme Court itself asked the Election Commission that if you're bringing out percentages, surely you have the absolute numbers. You can't be calculating percentages without absolute numbers. What is the problem with sharing absolute numbers? And it's being done regularly. To which the Election Commission Council basically said that sometimes there is a mismatch between the voter turnout and then the EVM, the number of votes that are counted. But if there is a clear, cogent explanation for that mismatch, that can be given to citizens. They, of course, understand it if there is a properly reasoned, cause given for that. One cannot hide behind secrecy and saying we won't share information because there might be a mismatch. Now that kind of argument really erodes public trust, and I think that then leads to these kind of concerns that something might be amiss and there might be a possibility that there is wrongdoing that is happening.
I want to go back to the issue of hate speech. And we've seen, like you rightly said, even the Prime Minister of the country indulging in a series of attacks against minorities, Muslims in particular, multiple times a day in some occasions. And, the EC's reluctance to act against BJP, not just the Prime Minister, but even BJP, Karnataka's post has not been taken down. Even till date, it still exists. So what does this show? Is there any doubt that there is absolutely any independence at all? Or do you think there can still be an explanation?
Look, there is no explanation for selective action by a body that is supposed to act in a fair and independent manner. So, if there is a violation of the model code of conduct, we are not saying that if it is done by an opposition party, there should not be action. But certainly, one cannot say that action will only be taken or seem to be taken or in a strong way be taken when it is a leader of an opposition party. And the same violation or even more grievous violations in some cases, the complaints that have come against the ruling party leadership, that will not be acted upon with the same kind of responsiveness and urgency. And there can be no excuse, Pooja, for something like that. But let me say that when one talks about the independence and people's trust in an institution, it's also very important that some of these things be worked on in a democracy very, very carefully at every step of the way. So I would like to remind your viewers that there has been a long history in the last year where we've seen how the Supreme Court passed a very, very significant judgment in which they said that, and they looked at all the evidence that was put in front of them, and they said that the selection of election commissioners must be done by an independent committee. And the Supreme Court said that till an appropriate law is brought in, which ensures independent selection of the election commissioners, there should be a body of the Prime Minister, the leader of opposition, and the Chief Justice of India, three people who will select the election commissioners, so that this particular body, when it is conducting elections, it's really very clear to citizens that this body is not at all biased. It is not comprising of people who might be acolytes of the ruling party or any other party, and therefore people have trust in the election commission. Now, unfortunately, we saw that very quickly after the Supreme Court judgment, the government brought in and pushed a bill, and it became law, which basically said that the selection committee of the election commissioners will comprise the prime minister, the leader of opposition, and a minister from the cabinet. So this time we had the prime minister, Mr. Amit Shah, the home minister, and the leader of opposition, who selected the election commissioners just shortly before the elections took place. And even when that selection was happening, the leader of opposition, very widely it was reported in the media, came out and said that the names of the shortlisted candidates were also not shared with him. They were shared with him just a few minutes before the meeting took place, and therefore, when selections were made of the election commissioners, there was already a very big doubt that was cast on the integrity of the election commission and that the selection process of the election commissioners. Now, when that happens, and the worry that people then carry is that it's probably people who are close to the administration of the ruling dispensation who have been selected as election commissioners. In that sort of a situation, it is even more important that the election commission function transparently. Let not just things be done fairly and independently, let them also be seen to be done independently and fairly. And in that environment and climate, when for the first time we start seeing information being suppressed, when absolute numbers of voter turnout is not given out, when we are seeing that there is selective action that is being taken in favor of the ruling party and against the opposition, it really then causes alarm, it causes a discomfort among citizens. And in fact, the Election Commission Council in the Supreme Court said, about the petitioners who were asking for transparency, said that, these kind of questions dissuade first time voters from coming in to vote. I mean, nothing can be more ironic than that, because what causes people to lose interest in participating in the electoral process, if they feel their vote won't count, if they feel that what might be happening is, much beyond their control, they have no way of knowing what is happening. So transparency can only lead to greater participation. It can only enthuse people to come out and participate and vote, which is really what the election commission is about, and what they have been repeatedly saying, please come out and vote. They've been appealing to voters, and all of this is very important. And I think that when we are seeing the action on, whether it is on hate speech, other violations of the model code of conduct of the election commission, it needs to be seen in this larger context and appreciated in this larger context.
So that brings me to my last question. Given the Election Commission's response when citizens like you, activists like you, approach them, the fact that they're not even willing to engage or be forthcoming with their responses, do you worry that there is a shadow cast on whether or not the elections are free and fair at all, and if there is a level playing field at all this time around?
Absolutely. I think what is very worrying, and this is something that was brought out by the Citizens Commission on Elections, which was a group that was set up under the chairpersonship of Justice Lokur, who's a retired judge of the Supreme Court, was that for elections to be free and fair in any democracy, and in India specifically, if we were to talk in that context, it's very important that the Election Commission play the role of an independent referee that it is supposed to ensure to ensure a level playing field, to ensure that every vote counts in our democracy. Now, what we are seeing is, unfortunately, even when we went in a delegation to give the letter to the Election Commission asking for greater transparency in the voter turnout, nobody in the commission, not just the commissioners, not even any officers of the Election Commission, were willing to talk to the citizens. In fact, we were even told that there are no public dealing hours. When we said that we could come back in a public dealing hour, they said that, there are no public dealing hours. Now, imagine in a democracy, during elections, if citizens want to submit a memorandum, which in this particular case, it was signed by thousands of people across the country, or explain their concerns to someone in the commission, there was no way to get anybody to even engage with citizens, which really also sends out a very, very concerning signal to citizens. And I think that the role of the commission has to be very, very strong in terms of the action that it takes, so that a very strong signal is sent out that the model code of conduct will be upheld. The signal needs to be not selective. It needs to be seen to be fair and balanced, and it needs to be uniform, where for the same kind of sort of violation, one can't see that a notice is also not sent to one person because they happen to be from a certain party or holding a certain post, but someone else might be given a totally different and a much more stringent punishment for the same. Also, like I said, that for people to have faith that their vote counts, for people to have faith in the final electoral result, the voter turnout is critical. And like I said, the Election Commission must take every step to show that it is working transparently, to work transparently, and to be accountable to the people of the country. Because finally, we are a democracy. It has many aspects. It's not just elections, but elections are one of the most fundamental aspects, and free and fair elections are the most fundamental aspects of a democracy. And for people to continue to have faith in the electoral process, it's very important that the Election Commission be above board and function properly.
I thank you for joining me, and also thank on behalf of the citizens for taking this fight up to the Election Commission. We can only hope that some answers will come over the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pooja.
This election season, your right to choose puts you at the heart of it again.
We'd like to be your eyes and ears.
Choose the journalism and media that serves democracy and you.
Simply head on to newslaundry.com/subscription and pick up the TNMNL joint subscription of your choice today.